So after the PvP season ends in February, there's going to be a huge balance patch. And I wanted to give a little bit of a summary of what the new philosophies they're giving, and then provide some of my opinions and expertise on the thief changes, and then go over a little bit of the highlights of some of the other classes. So basically, over the years, the game has been massively power crept, which made the game feel very spammy and removed a lot of the skillful decision making of classes. This upcoming balance patch will make the game much less bursty and promote more meaningful skill usage. So, condition amulets with expertise have been removed from PvP. Also, amulets with boon duration or concentration have been removed. So, basically condition duration overall has been reduced. So, cleansing is not as useful, but it also means that because cleansing is going to be reduced as well, that conditions are going to feel a little bit more meaningful and not so spammy, just like constantly putting them on, and just that's kind of how the game kind of feels like playing against a Connie class. You just cleanse something and then you've already got all those Connies back on you, and then you have to cleanse again. Right now, for someone who's playing against cleanses though, it's also going to feel a little bit better, because as a condition class, your damage is going to, it's going to run its course very much sooner than it normally would. So like a cleanse wouldn't be too much of a detriment to your damage combo. And this also means that condition builds will usually run hybrid amulets now, because the only options are Rabid, which it's a pretty condition oriented amulet, but then the only other choice is Carrion, Wizard, and Sage, and those are very hybrid-y amulets. So I feel like this is a little bit more healthy for the game for hybrid builds than condition builds, like that are just purely condition, because purely condition builds feel kind of like bunkery and not too interactive, whereas hybrid builds are very aggressive. So condition durations have been increased for very few skills that feel like they're not that impactful. So like the Torch 4 on Ranger has a really high condition duration, but every other skill has a very low condition duration. So it gives more identity to those skills, that they're clearly a condition skill, and cleansing is where you want to save that for that skill, whereas the other condition skills you kind of want to not stand in the bonfire to not get the conditions there. So yeah, it's going to feel a little bit more interactive in my opinion. Power skills are also being completely nerfed. All the coefficients, which means they're scaling with power, are being reduced by maybe like a third, I'd say. And all 4 stat amulets have been lowered in stats. And this is really important, because not only does that reduce all of your stats, making less power creep, but it also kind of balances the dynamic between 4 stat amulets and 3 stat amulets, which pretty much 3 stat amulets haven't been used in a while, so that's really nice. Might, Volant, and quickness, and just overall boon durations have been lowered across the board, so there's going to be less of this idea of I'm just moving around constantly doing a ton of damage, and it's going to make it more meaningful when you want to do damage that you want to stack up and buff and then do a burst. So that's just fitting their philosophy of what they want. Also, skills that have hard CC have been reduced to basically deal no damage. They have a power coefficient of 0.01. And while this is a good change because it prevents you from wanting to just spam out your CC, which does damage whenever it's off cooldown, it is kind of weird because it is an RPG, and I feel like it just feels out of place when you see a skill do like 23 damage. And even some skills, I feel, even though they do really heavy CC, they kind of should do a lot of damage because they're elite skills or they're high impact skills. So for example, Reaper Shroud 5, it's a really big impact kind of feeling skill, and then it doesn't really do any damage now because it's a CC skill. And I feel like some skills should have their identity kept by making them high impact damage and CC at the same time. Now, this includes skills like Prime Light Beam. While I thought that, a 3.0 coefficient was maybe too high, maybe not a 0.01, right? There still needs to be a little bit of identity to these skills, and I think, especially for like elites like Dragon's Maw, I feel like they should be a little bit more than just CC. Also, while power might have been nerfed a little bit more than Condi, weakness duration has also been reduced across the board. So that was a big counter to power damage, and it felt really, it just felt really unfun to have like permanent weakness on you that you couldn't cleanse. So it's going to be a lot more interactive, I feel. And of course, because power and Condi damage is being reduced, sustain has to be dropped as well to match those. So most healing skills of all classes have been increased in cooldown, so it's not going to be like you just use your heal skill off cooldown just to get the healing per second. You're going to want to use it at an opportune time or when you're going to get the most value out of it. And Signet heals, like the Signet of Restoration on Elementalist and Healing Signet on Warrior, are also reduced in healing to kind of match. Protection durations have been lowered, so you won't see like this permanent protection thing too much. You might see it on Rangers and Mirages still, but it's definitely going to be a lot harder to do. And evasion and blocking skills have been increased in cooldown to reduce damage mitigation. So because sustain is lowered, the whole one-shot meta is going to not be necessary to kind of keep that in check, right? Because all the power damage is being lowered, so it's going to be really hard to one-shot people. But also, non-one-shot builds are going to feel more meaningful against those, tanky builds, because the damage that they land is going to stick instead of being immediately healed. Passives are also being completely removed from PvP viability. So initially, passives like Endure Pain and Instant Reflexes had a 40-second cooldown, and in recent years they were nerfed to about 90 seconds. After the patch, they'll have a 5-minute cooldown, so they're going to be much less present, but they might still see some play because the alternatives to these traits are going to be not as valuable either. I think that this is probably not that good of a change, but I feel that it's also probably a byproduct of them not being able to do anything besides change the numbers. So until they can get reworked into more interactive traits, this is better than leaving them how they were, because playing around passives wasn't really that engaging. But yeah, definitely should at some point in the future get these traits reworked into something that's a little bit more interactive. I'm going to go into some of the highlights now of the other classes, and then I'll do a full review of, at least to the things that matter of the Thief class. So let's start off with Engineer. The Explosions trait line has been reworked, which is really nice because before this was kind of like a PvE only trait line. It just did pure damage, and now it's going to give a little bit of sustain and utility, so I think this is really good. And it has a little bit of synergy with Explosions, which was kind of a thing that they really never went into, so now it's really nice that they're doing that. All of the recent reworks to trait lines that ArenaNet have been doing have been really good, And I really like that because it shows that they're not, they're still able to kind of create new interesting balance and design and class, right? So, you know, if they ever come out with new elite specs, you know, hopefully they'll keep going with the direction that they're going with these reworks, because that'll make, you know, the new elite specs really fun. So yeah, Devastation on Revenant is also being reworked, and basically it's going to have that lifesteal theme to it, but it's going to be a little bit less conditional to it. So instead of flanking and requiring vulnerability to do it, it's going to be based on a new buff called Battle Scars, which you can get from using your heal skill or just from being in combat. And that's really nice. This is kind of already a powerful trait line, and I kind of like that it's being changed to be more viable for non-power builds, and more like sustained builds will want to use Devastation, because it moves them towards more aggressive sustained builds. So I like that. Now, Mirage has been hit very hard. Instead of having 2 dodges, when you slot in the Mirage elite spec, you have 1 dodge. 50 endurance is your cap. Now, this is a huge nerf, way more than it seems like it is, because when you have max dodge, right, you don't gain any more endurance. So having 1 dodge means that you want to use that single dodge as soon as possible so that you can use the next dodge as soon as possible. Whereas when you have 2 dodges, you can kind of sit between that first dodge and the second dodge and still gain your endurance while still saving your first dodge for when you actually need it. And I feel like this kind of like dumbed down the class even harder, and I feel like that's not the direction that you really want to go for Mirage, because it was the kind of issue with it was that it was kind of already very dumbed down because you just spammed your dodge off cooldown. And now it's even more so that way. It's just been nerfed, right? So I feel like this is a really bad change and not where you want to go. Perhaps instead you could put 1 second of exhaustion when they use an ambush skill, so that way they can use their dodge whenever they want, but they have to choose between whether they want to use their ambush skill to, you know, give them the choice between you know, getting more dodges later or using that damage now, or something else, some kind of other trade-off, but definitely not the 1 dodge. That seems a little bit, it's not the direction that you want to go, right? You want to make the class more interactive, but also not more dumbed down. So also, soul beasts have had their trade-off added. They can only have 1 pet. I feel that this is probably not the best implementation, but because it wasn't that bad, because they still allowed synergy between pet swapping traits when going into beast form. So that's still really good. And the Chronomancer rework was kind of like really bad in my opinion, because it removed a lot of the synergy from the class. But Soul Beast still has that synergy. It's just a little bit less powerful. So I think that that's pretty okay of a change. So now I will be going over the thief profession. 7 years of experience. Let's get straight into this. So Death Blossom has been increased to 5 initiative cost. Basically they're going through like a whole they're making thief class a lot less spammy by increasing a lot of the initiative costs. So Shadow Shot is 5 initiative, Shortbow 3, which is an evade, is 5 initiative now. It's all of these are being increased by 1 initiative. Pistol Whip is 6 initiative. Choking Gas is actually a 6 initiative too, but it used to be 4. But they've also changed it so that it no longer dazes on the strike that is after they have like a certain threshold of poison, it just dazes on the first strike, which I really like because that's first of all a buff to power builds. Even though it's 6 initiative, having that daze on the first strike is really good for power, and less good for Condi because Condi wants to spam out as many as it can for damage as well as daze. So I really like this. However, I think that the daze duration should not be increased. So they're increasing the daze duration, and I feel like it should only be an interrupt, not so much like a really long-term daze, because we all know that thieves have initiative and they can spam initiative as much as they have of it, and then that results in CC skills being very valuable with initiative because you can spam that out. So yeah, I don't know, I don't feel like you should be able to perma daze people with choking ass builds. It feels kind of obnoxious and not really necessary. So maybe don't increase the daze duration on choking gas, but leave everything else that was suggested the same. I really like that. Also, Death's Retreat is increased to 6 initiative. I really like this because it was too spammy of a skill. You like sit in stealth for a while as a Deadeye, and then you use your one-shot burst, and then if it doesn't work out, you just Death Retreat out and then try again. So this is really good because you're only going to be able to use like 2 Death Retreats unless you use some kind of like combo to get more initiative. In which case that's really good because then you have to use cooldowns to get out of that situation. So I like that. Also, all classes have had their healing skills increased in cooldown, but the thief skills are kind of important because they were very powerful healing skills. So withdraw gave you an evade on your heal, which was really powerful, so you're gonna get a lot less evasion uptime because your heal skill has increased cooldown. Also, Channeled Vigor gave you dodges, so you're going to get less dodges because you're going to be using Channeled Vigor less. Hide in the Shadows didn't get nerfed, but it's really not that good of a skill. And yeah, the other 2 heal skills were Skelk Venom and Malicious Reprisal or something, but those weren't really that good either. So really the only 2 heal skills were Withdraw and Channeled Vigor, and I feel like Withdraw is still going to be the best healing skill for thieves after the patch. Smokescreen was increased to a 35-second cooldown from 25. I feel like this is not enough of a nerf. The skill right now feels almost like an invulnerability field to most classes, so unless you have like some sort of non-projectile ranged attack or like a really huge AoE that you can cast from range, there's really no way to play it around Smokescreen because it's kind of like a permanent evade field, like unless you can attack faster than 1 second per attack. Yeah, Smokescreen felt like one of the least interactive skills, and it was on such a low cooldown that it almost felt like invincibility. I feel like in comparison to other traits or utilities, it was way overpowered, but 35 seconds cooldown may not be terrible, but I would say maybe 40 to 45 seconds would be a lot better because this would also prevent a lot of permastealth options. Or just reduce the duration of Smokescreen so that there's a little bit more counterplay to the actual usage of Smokescreen and not to the lack of it being available. So that could be good, leaving it at a 35-second cooldown but reducing its duration so that they're not as safe inside it. And then Dagger Storm was reduced in damage significantly by like 60%. This kind of makes Bassy Venom a kind of a good choice, right? Because using Dagger Storm before was like a really good cleave ability when someone goes into the down state, but now it's not so much, right? Like pretty much Dagger Storm was a damage skill, right, in team fights where you were kind of safe. You could deal damage in team fights while being like immune to counter pressure. And now it's not going to really do damage, so it's kind of like just an evade skill that you just reflect and cripple, but don't really do too much damage. So I feel like it still might be pretty okay, because if a lot of the class's evasion is being taken away, this is still a pretty good evade skill. However, I feel like Dagger Pistol build will probably swap over to Bassy Venom. So yeah, traits. Deadly Arts received a few more nerfs to like the damage and durations of conditions and might. I feel like Deadly Arts was kind of already getting moved out of the meta, so I'm not sure if these nerfs are going to be too good for it. While everything else is kind of getting nerfed, this wasn't nerfed too hard, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. However, Shadow Arts was barely nerfed, much less so than Deadly Arts. And Shadow Arts is already kind of like the meta trait line. And all that got changed was a trait that no one uses for rezzing, and Shadow Rejuvenation, which was kind of like, yeah, it was a good change, but that wasn't really the issue with Shadow Arts. I feel like the issue is that there's too much stealth uptime, and the counterplay to stealth is to prevent a thief from using combos to get in stealth, right? So like when you see a black powder, you can kind of like spam CC around that. However, for a thief to get in stealth with Shadow Arts is very easy, because their heal skill, which combined with withdrawal, basically makes it so that they can get into stealth with an evade skill. So there's really no way to counterplay that. So they get into stealth, and then they can reposition and re-stealth with their actual combos. So yeah, I think that the issue is that thieves need to be using more combos to get their stealth, because that's more interactive. So what they should do is they should first of all remove there's a minor trait called Meld with Shadows that gives an extra second of stealth for every stealth application they get. They should remove that entirely, so you only get like 3 seconds of stealth every combo instead of 4. And instead they should place the initiative gain while in stealth from Shadow Rejuvenation on that trait. So remove it from Shadow Rejuvenation and put it on the minor trait Meld with Shadows. So this way you'll get more initiative to use those combos, but you'll need to do more combos to get that stealth. So you'll need to spend more time getting that stealth, which means there's more counterplay to the stealth, because you'll be in the area of your combos more often. It's not like, oh, I get more stealth from less combos, so I can easily get out of the area. And this will make it a lot more interactive as well, because you'll be in stealth less overall, because you'll just you'll have less stealth still, because the actual numbers of getting initiative back from that trait is less so than you get from just getting more stealth, right? Because you have other skills that give you stealth for not using initiative. Also, Acrobatics is losing a huge passive from instant reflexes, which is pretty good. However, the alternatives are really not that good. And Feline Grace, which was a 1 second internal cooldown for 5 second duration vigor, is now being a 3 second vigor duration, which I feel is still pretty close to permanent because of Bountiful Theft giving a lot of vigor as well. So I feel like Acro Thief is still going to be pretty good, especially because the sword trait is there. Sword thieves are pretty much going to use that still. And yeah, sword dagger or sword pistol are still probably going to be pretty good, even with pistol whip being increased in cooldown or initiative. Now, trickery had a little bit of a slight nerf here. So Bountiful Theft instead of removing 3 boons or stealing 3 boons, it's going to steal 2 boons. Now, it used to steal 2 boons back in Heart of Thorns, but then it was changed to 3. But this was a really good buff when they did it, because how Bountiful Theft works is it has a priority, different from other boon ripping and stealing skills where they're kind of more randomish. Bountiful Theft has a priority of Stability and Aegis as the first 2 stolen boons. So whenever you steal to someone, it'll always remove Stability and it'll always remove Aegis. Of course, if they don't evade it, right? And then the third one in the priority is Protection, and then whatever else is, below that. So whenever you steal to someone with 3 boons stolen, you'll always remove Protection. However, with only 2, you won't remove Protection every time. And this feels kind of weird because when you steal to someone, it's kind of like when you want your whole team to be focusing that target. And if you don't remove Protection, then it doesn't really remove that, heavy counter to thieves, right? Which is preventing high burst damage, because they'll still have protection potentially. Protection durations are being reduced, but I still feel like thieves should be able to choose when they want to do their burst with steel, and not have to wait, because they already have to wait for when the right opportunity is. They should definitely be allowed to do their damage when they want to do it. So yeah, I would just completely nix that change to Bountiful Theft being 2 boons, leave it at 3. If boon stealing is too high, maybe remove Larcenous Strike, or I don't know, something else. But definitely on Bountiful Theft, that needs to be there. So Backstab is getting a slight nerf, but really not that big of a nerf. I think that because of all the other power coefficients being reduced as well, Backstab still hits pretty decent. And what's more important is, even though you're not going to be able to one-shot with Backstab anymore, the damage from Backstab is going to stick. So you don't really need to run Assassin Signet, hopefully. But I would really like to see Assassin Signet not be as strong anymore. We'll have to see after the patch, because we don't know. Because if everything has less coefficients, then Assassin Signet is not as strong, right? Because what Assassin Signet does is it gives you power, and if there's less coefficient, then power is less valuable. We'll have to see. I really don't like using Assassin Signet because it's such a PvE oriented skill. It just feels like Sikkim, but it has even less utility than Sikkim. I think Thief was a much more skillful class when Assassin Signet wasn't meta. So we'll see how that works out. Hopefully something like Infiltrator Signet or basically anything else would just be more fun and skillful for thieves to use. So we'll see. Black Powder has been increased in its radius from 120 to 180. So that's basically half the distance between what it used to be before and the size of choking gas. This is a pretty huge buff, because before it was a pretty small radius, so you couldn't really put it down and prevent people from hitting you with the blinds, because by the time they hit you, they wouldn't be in the black powder, right? They'd hit you before they went into it. Now you can kind of use black powder to hide in, and if someone tries to hit you, they might get a tick of the blind before they get to you. So it's definitely a huge change, and this also allows stealth stacking to be a lot better. And this is why I think that smoke screen should probably be nerfed a lot more, because black powder is a little bit more counterplayable, and they should be forced to use that instead, especially now since they're buffing it, right? So I think this is a really good state for like dagger pistol thieves, right? So that's going to be really good too. Thieves are, I mean, sword builds look like they're completely fine, and even dagger builds seem like they're really fine after this, so Thief seems like it's in a really good spot. Daredevil. Now, the dodges on Daredevil have been changed a little bit. So instead of dash, the 2 damaging dodges have their modifiers increased from 10% to 15%, but they were lowered in the damage that they actually do. This is kind of weird because that's more of like a PvE kind of like change to give a modifier instead of an active effect. But because of how doing damage on dodge worked, it kind of makes sense, because it's not that interactive to get damaged by a dodge. So I feel like maybe this is kind of an okay change, even though it feels kind of weird. Escapist Fortitude was reduced in the healing that it does when you dodge from 450 to 150. So this gave a lot of sustain to Daredevils because they would dodge so much, and this actually healed them quite a bit. So yeah, this is a huge sustain nerf to Daredevils. So actually, I think that Dagger Pistol Daredevil is gonna see a little bit of a resurgence, because it never really gained that much from Escapist Fortitude anyways, because it usually used its dodges for mobility or just avoiding damage rather than evading it, right? Also, Pulmonary Impact is being heavily nerfed, but Havoc Mastery was already kind of used more so on Dagger Pistol builds. So yeah, this is kind of like a pretty heavy nerf to Pistol Whip builds, right? Because you dodge so much with Pistol Whip that you gain so much sustain, and then it also used Pulmonary Impact. So it's going to use Havoc Mastery probably instead. Otherwise, I think Daredevil is still pretty good. Definitely seems pretty good for Dagger Pistol Daredevil, this whole thing. I do want to see, though, Swipe to be increased in range, because it just doesn't feel right. It feels really weird to have a 600 range like steal when like pistol Daredevils are using a 900 range attack, and you can't even steal to someone when you're using pistols because it's lower range than your pistols. And like Dagger Pistol Daredevil, which is based on like having a 900 range Shadow Shot, which is now being nerfed, and now you can't even like backstab from that range. So it feels kind of, yeah, it just feels unfun. And if they really want to put a trade-off to Daredevil, I feel like they should do it through the exhaustion mechanic instead of swipe. So maybe they could revert swipe to steal, or increase swipe to 900 range instead of 1200 range, or do some sort of like other thing, because I feel like that is really what made people enjoy the Daredevil class, or at least the Dagger Pistol Daredevil, is having that ability to at least 900 range, because swipe just feels really bad right now. And after that you have Deadeye. So Deadeye is probably not going to be that good after the patch, but Death's Judgment got like a pretty okay nerf, but I still want to see Binding Shadow get a reveal on it, just like Death's Judgment, so it can't be used in stealth, because that was kind of uninteractive play, right? Like they're still gonna have decent stealth, and then like a stealth that I can just precast Binding Shadow, you can't even see it coming, then they can steal to you right before it lands, and then you're knocked down, and it's like a really heavy knockdown because you're also immobilized, so you need to use a skill that removes immob and stun breaks, and then you have like a lot of vuln on you as well, so like you have to do all that while they're like casting Death's Judgment on you as well. So it doesn't feel like a lot of counterplay to that. So I'd like to see the reveal being placed on Binding Shadow so that you can see, first of all, the animation of Binding Shadow, and that way you can do something or prepare to do something about it. So yeah, other than that, there was some irrelevant like pistol buffs, which I don't really care for too much. If they really want to make pistols viable again, they probably need to make the initiative gain on Pistol Whip or on Unload less conditional, because it's really too easy to counterplay Pistol 3, the Unload ability. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the patch summary. I like the direction that they're going. Some of my criticisms are that they should make their CC abilities that are really high impact, like elites, still feel more elite-like by doing a little bit more damage than nothing, even though they probably shouldn't do as much damage as they were doing before. And otherwise, yeah, it seems like it's going to be a pretty good patch.